slavery, torture, kidnapping. Terrible crimes that nobody would really expect to find in a goofy pirate manga, yet they're all present in the arc that many cite as the turning point in One Piece. The point where the story really clicks, that being Arlong Park. My name is AJ Thinks Too Much, and today I'm going to dive into why this arc in particular is the make or break point for countless fans, and how it's the first to truly showcase the primary themes within One Piece. Like I said previously, this is where One Piece really hooked a lot of people. And I'd argue that to be because this is where many of the major themes within the story make their first appearance. Those being of freedom and found family, as well as our first major look into what makes Luffy special as a protagonist, as a hero, but also just everything that makes him Luffy, really. That is, making someone ask for help instead of just helping them. And then, just helping them regardless of their backstory, which he honestly falls asleep through 90% of the time. But first, I wanted to touch on the surface themes that you find within this arc. Those being Nami's backstory, Arlong's oppressive rule of Nami's island, and his ambitions to expand it to the entirety of the East Blue, and then presumably the entire world, and the Straw Hat's ultimate decision to defend Nami despite all of that. Now, the real meat here is the understated / implied themes. Now, you could argue that they're political in nature, which I will do, but let's just get into that first. First among them is subjugation. Really, it has an overarching theme of slavery that I'm wanting to tie back into, but primarily with that is subjugation. Nami is held captive and forced to draw maps in exchange for her family's lives, and the lives of those on the island. And when this is first shown, she's a little girl being taken away from her found family, that with Nojiko and Belmare. And of course, as we all know, Belmare is murdered and Nami is taken. One of the earliest scenes we see there is Nami in a room by herself drawing maps while being chained to the table because Arlong doesn't trust her, won't let her leave. And it's not until she demonstrates a level of loyalty, a level of willingness to betray those who she used to call family, that he lets her go. And yet still, there's a metaphorical chain around her ankle still. The threat that if she fails, her island just gets razed. The people she loves get killed. It's terrible. And while this is awful, what's even worse is that the story glosses over this because it's a shonen manga at the end of the day. But she does this for years. A decade, I believe, where she's in a room all by herself. And even when she escapes the room, she's not allowed to act too close to the townspeople, lest they get punished in her stead. And even when she goes out into the seas, she might be free physically from Arlong, but as a fishman, he could realistically hunt her down whenever he wants. He has a whole crew of his own waiting to hunt her down. In addition to that, he forces her to be a burglar. Well, I don't exactly remember if he forced her to be a burglar, but he told her to get money however she can, which means that she couldn't get too close to anybody because she was always going to betray them in the end. Now, moving on from the subjugation, let's get into the deeper themes of slavery here. One of those being generational hatred. This goes back to Arlong in that his hate didn't start with anything done to him personally. He'd already inherited. This is something we see expounded upon later in the Fishman Island arc, but for now, we just know that for generations, humans and fishmen have not gotten along. Fishmen were slaves, they were tortured, beaten, devalued. They were the lowest of the low. Until recently, they weren't. We'll also learn about this in Fishman Island, but fishmen basically were considered subhuman until they weren't. And just because the law changed doesn't mean that the hatred went along with. The scars of these acts inflicted upon them by humans, they cut deep. And Arlong is just the first example that we see of this. Arlong's hate wasn't born in a vacuum, it was learned. It's the kind of hate that outlives reason, passed down through pain until it becomes one's identity. And this just doesn't stop with Arlong's own crew. He got passed down the hatred, but he doesn't intend for it to end with him. He intends for it to bleed down to future generations. Of course, under his rule, because he intends to rule the whole of East Blue and eventually the world. He intends to keep the cycle going. The next point is reparations. Twisted as they are, Arlong did want reparations for the hurt that was inflicted upon him and his people. But he was going about it in completely the wrong way, as he sought it monetarily and through returning the pain that had been inflicted upon his people. None of the people on Nami's island, none of them did him wrong, but he still found them to be equally culpable, just for being a part of the same race that wronged his people. He ran Nami ragged for years in an attempt to pay off a debt that he never intended for her to ever be able to pay off. From his point of view, it was enough of a favor for him even keeping her alive, and by extension the people of her island alive. That was enough. That was enough of a favor from him. That was there. And then, moving away from slavery, we can move into the found family. This is something that you first see with Nami and her family. She's an orphan, is taken in by Belmare along with Nojiko, and is raised. She develops heart and is able to move past any kind of hatred that Arlong tries to instill within her. Arlong is nothing but hate, abuses her, isolates her. Most importantly, later on into the arc, One Piece shows us how to resolve oppression. This doesn't really finish up in the Arlong Island arc though, or Arlong Park rather. This finishes up more so in the Fishman Island, but it doesn't even completely resolve there. It's interesting because there's over 500 chapters between these two arcs, and One Piece kept this through line alive, mostly through little just lore drops, whether that be through the cover stories or just newscasts that you'll see throughout the story, but it shows that oppression really isn't something that you can solve so simply. Yes, they beat Arlong. Yes, they beat Hachi. They dismantled Arlong's crew, destroyed him physically as well as metaphorically, with Luffy honestly just absolutely tearing apart his tower in one of the most epic scenes in the manga. But while it may have solved the issues for them, it didn't really do anything for an overall Fishmankind. This is shown especially well in the Fishman Island arc, as Luffy comes face to face with essentially Arlong Part 2 on drugs. Quite literally on drugs. But Horty's hatred runs even deeper. This is something we can dive into a future video, but Fishman Island deals much more with the complex relationship between fishmen and humans, how it got as bad as it did, how the attempted resolutions in the past failed, how while humans were bad, there were also bad people on the fishman side, which while that's something I don't think they should have emphasized as much. I'm glad that the story didn't actually emphasize it as they glossed over it, but they showed what a future repaired relationship between humans and fishmankind could look like. And this through line even continues hundreds of chapters later past the Fishman Island arc and the Reverie arc. And it shows that even with the attempted resolutions of the Fishman Island arc, that this complex issue is still one that continues. These feelings, the hatred, the inferiority, all of this carries through and is still prevalent in the story. So now, just some final thoughts. I'd come up with a couple quotes that I think really embody this arc of the story. One is relating to Arlong and Luffy, and both of their respective relationships to freedom and justice. Because justice is one of the main themes of One Piece. Justice is one thing that a man has to decide for himself. What he does, how he pursues it. Each character in One Piece has a different definition of justice. Some slightly different from each other, some radically different. But Arlong and Luffy are two of the earliest examples of really just following what their own compass lead, heading in the direction that their own personal compasses show them. So, to Arlong, justice means domination, control, a twisted mirror of the world that stole his. But to Luffy, justice means freedom. Freedom not just for himself, but freedom for all. And another one is just for the arc itself. Arlong Park doesn't end with the world being fixed. The Straw Hats' victory saves Nami, but the system that created Arlong still permeates the seas. That's the uncomfortable truth hidden beneath the fanfare of their victory. Because One Piece has never been simply about defeating villains, but challenging the structures that created them. And that is what I'm going to talk about in future videos about One Piece. Not about the individual battle, about the individual villain, but hopefully about the structures that the story lays out that create those villains and why simply punching them, it won't matter unless you destroy the system that lies beneath. Thank you.